My name is Emma, and I'm 28 years old. Last Christmas morning, while searching for wrapping paper in my father's study, I found something that made my blood run cold. Hidden in his desk drawer was my mother's medical bracelet, the one she wore every single day, the one that should have been with her when she died alone in that hospital room exactly 1 year earlier. That's when I knew my father's story about being stuck in traffic was a lie. Before I continue this heartbreaking story, I want to know where you're watching from today. Please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe if you believe family secrets always find their way to the surface. Trust me, what I'm about to share will make you question everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you. Growing up in Westchester County, everyone envied our family. My father Richard, 55 years old and a successful investment banker, seemed like the perfect husband and provider. My mother Grace, 52 and a beloved high school English teacher, radiated warmth that drew people to her like moths to a flame. To outsiders, we were living the American dream in our colonial home with its manicured lawn and white picket fence. But perfect facades often hide the darkest secrets. I need to take you back to understand how we got here. My childhood memories are peppered with moments that seemed normal then but now make my skin crawl. Dad would check Mom's phone every evening, claiming he was just making sure it was charged. He'd insist on driving her everywhere because he worried about her safety. When her teacher friends invited her for dinner, he'd suddenly have symphony tickets or restaurant reservations that couldn't be changed. I watched my vibrant mother slowly become isolated, but she always smiled and said Dad just loved us so much he wanted us all to himself. Everything changed 3 years ago when Mom started experiencing mysterious symptoms. It began with dizzy spells during her morning classes. She'd grip her desk, waiting for the room to stop spinning. Then came the crushing fatigue that made her cancel after-school tutoring sessions she'd maintained for 20 years. The woman who ran marathons could barely climb our stairs without stopping to catch her breath. Dad immediately took charge of her health care with the efficiency of a military general. He researched the best specialists, made all her appointments, and insisted on accompanying her to every single one. "I need to make sure they're giving you the best care, darling," he'd say, holding her hand in waiting rooms while typing furiously on his phone with the other. Mom would smile weakly and squeeze his hand back, but I noticed how her eyes had lost their spark. The private nurse arrived 6 months into Mom's illness. Linda was a stern woman in her 50s who reported directly to Dad. She moved into our guest room and monitored Mom's every move, meal, and medication. Dad said it was necessary because Mom's condition was so delicate, but something felt wrong about how Linda would hover whenever I tried to spend time alone with my mother. One afternoon when Dad was at work and Linda was supposedly running errands, I found Mom sitting by her bedroom window, staring at the bird feeder she used to fill religiously. Her hands shook as she reached for mine. "Emma, sweetheart, I need you to help me," she whispered, glancing toward the door. My heart pounded as I leaned closer. "Mom, what's wrong? What do you need?" But before she could answer, we heard Linda's car in the driveway. Mom's face went pale, and she pulled her hand back. "Nothing, dear. I'm just tired. So very tired." The incident haunted me, but when I tried to bring it up with Dad, he dismissed my concerns. "Your mother's illness is affecting her mind, Emma. The doctors warned us about confusion and paranoia. We need to be patient and trust the professionals." He showed me a thick folder of medical reports I didn't understand, pointing to terms like cognitive decline and treatment-resistant depression. How could I argue with medical professionals? But doubt gnawed at me like a persistent ache. Mom's friends had stopped visiting entirely. When I called her best friend Susan to ask why, she sounded strange and distant. "Your father thinks it's best if Grace isn't overwhelmed by visitors," she said before quickly ending the call. Mom's beloved book club, which she'd hosted for 15 years, suddenly moved to another member's house. Her phone mysteriously broke, and Dad replaced it with a basic model that could only call family members. During one of my visits, I noticed Mom barely touched the special protein shakes Linda prepared for her 3 times a day. They taste metallic, Mom confided when we were alone for a brief moment. But your father insists I need the nutrition. She looked so frail in her oversized cardigan, nothing like the woman who used to lead hiking trips for her students every spring. The turning point came when I accidentally discovered something I wasn't supposed to see. I'd come home early from work to surprise Mom with her favorite sunflowers. Dad's home office door was ajar, and I heard him on the phone. Yes, the policy is for $5 million, he said in his business voice. Given her condition, I want to make sure everything is in order. My blood ran cold. Life insurance. He was talking about life insurance. I stood frozen in the hallway as he continued. The doctors give her maybe 6 months to a year. I need to be prepared. His voice held no emotion, as if he were discussing stock options instead of his wife's life. When he emerged from his office, I pretended I'd just arrived. He smiled that perfect smile of his, the one that charmed clients and closed million-dollar deals. Emma, darling. What brings you home early? That night, I lay awake connecting dots I'd been too blind or too afraid to see. Mom's sudden illness after she inherited her father's estate. Dad's immediate control over her care. The isolation from friends and family. The private nurse who seemed more like a guard than a caregiver. And now, a massive life insurance policy I knew nothing about. My perfect father, the man I'd idolized my entire life, was beginning to look like something else entirely. Something monstrous. December 23rd started like any other day in our house, with Linda preparing Mom's morning medications and Dad reviewing financial reports over coffee. I'd taken time off work to help with Christmas preparations, hoping to recreate some normalcy for Mom's sake. She seemed better that morning, even managing to eat some scrambled eggs without the usual nausea. We were decorating sugar cookies when it happened. Mom stood up to get more sprinkles from the pantry and suddenly swayed. The mixing bowl crashed to the floor as she grabbed the counter, her face draining of color. I can't breathe, she gasped, clutching her chest. Her knees buckled, and I barely caught her before she hit the ground. Linda rushed in, taking charge with practiced efficiency while I called 911 with shaking hands. The ambulance arrived within minutes, and I rode with Mom while Linda called Dad. His response chilled me even as I held Mom's hand in the speeding ambulance. I'm in the middle of a critical merger meeting, he'd told Linda. I'll get there as soon as I can. A critical merger meeting while his wife was being rushed to the emergency room. The EMT inserted an 4 as Mom's eyes found mine. The blue folder, she whispered urgently. In my closet. Behind the shoes. Promise me, Emma. I promised, not understanding but desperate to give her whatever comfort I could. The emergency room was chaos, with doctors and nurses swarming around Mom's gurney. They stabilized her within an hour, and she was moved to a private room in the cardiac unit. Dad finally arrived 3 hours later, his suit impeccable and his expression carefully concerned. He swept into the room with flowers and chocolates, playing the devoted husband for the medical staff. Darling, you gave us such a scare, he said, kissing Mom's forehead. She looked at him with an expression I couldn't read, something between fear and resignation. Dad asked for a private moment with the doctors, and they spoke in hushed tones by the nurses' station. When he returned, he seemed satisfied about something. The doctors want to adjust your medications, he told Mom, patting her hand. I'll make sure Linda knows the new protocol when you come home. Mom's face fell. When I come home, she repeated softly. Dad checked his phone and frowned. I have to handle this merger situation, but I'll be back this evening. He left after barely 30 minutes, his cologne lingering in the sterile room. Christmas Eve dawned with fresh snow falling outside Mom's hospital window. She seemed stronger, even asking for her reading glasses so she could see the cards from her students that I'd brought. Your father used to write me poems, she said suddenly, staring at a particularly heartfelt card. Before we were married, he'd leave them on my car windshield. Terrible poems, really, but so romantic. Her voice held a wistfulness that broke my heart. Around 2 in the afternoon, Dad made his second appearance. He carried a small medical bag and spoke privately with Mom's nurse before entering. "Time for your vitamins, darling," he said, producing a syringe from the bag. Mom's eyes widened slightly. "I thought the doctors were handling my medications," she said. Dad's smile never wavered. "This is just your usual B12 injection." Dr. Morrison approved it. He administered the injection with practiced ease while I watched, something nagging at the back of my mind. Within an hour of Dad leaving, Mom's condition deteriorated dramatically. Her breathing became labored, and her heart monitor showed increasing irregularities. The nurses increased her oxygen and called for the on-call physician. I held her hand as she struggled, her eyes wide with fear. "He won't come," she whispered between gasps. "He won't come when it matters." I called Dad repeatedly as the afternoon wore on. Each time, his responses grew more distant. "Stuck in traffic." "Accident on the highway." "This snow is making everything impossible." But when I looked outside, the snow had stopped hours ago, and the roads were being cleared efficiently. By 8 o'clock, Mom was barely conscious. I begged him to hurry. "I'm doing my best, Emma," he said, his voice carrying an odd note I couldn't identify. The hospital chaplain arrived at 10, offering to sit with us. Mom rallied briefly, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "Be careful," she managed to whisper. "He's not who you think." Before I could ask what she meant, she began struggling for breath again. The monitors screamed their alarms, and medical staff flooded the room. I was pushed aside as they worked desperately to save her. At exactly 11:47 on Christmas Eve, my mother died. She passed away calling for Richard, the man who chose not to be there. The man who claimed weather and traffic kept him from her side. I held her cooling hand and sobbed while the chaplain murmured prayers. My strong, vibrant mother had died afraid and essentially alone, despite my presence. The injustice of it burned in my chest like acid. Dad arrived exactly 10 minutes after Mom was pronounced dead. His timing was so precise it felt choreographed. He wasn't disheveled from fighting through traffic. His coat wasn't wet from snow. He looked exactly as he had that afternoon, composed and collected. "Oh, Emma," he said, pulling me into an embrace that felt like a performance. "If only I'd been able to get here sooner." Later, when I asked the security desk about the weather conditions that evening, the guard looked confused. "Weather? It's been clear since 4 o'clock. Easiest Christmas Eve shift I've had in years." I stared at him, pieces of a terrible puzzle beginning to form in my mind. My father had lied about being stuck in traffic. He had chosen not to be with Mom in her final hours. But why? Dad moved through the aftermath of Mom's death with the efficiency of a man who'd rehearsed every step. Within hours of her passing, he'd arranged for cremation despite our family's long tradition of burial in the Westchester Memorial Gardens where 3 generations of Mom's family rested. When I protested, he produced documents with Mom's signature requesting cremation. The signature looked shaky, uncertain, nothing like her usual elegant script. The funeral felt like a business presentation rather than a farewell to a beloved wife and mother. Dad controlled every aspect, from the guest list to the eulogies. He stood at the podium in his charcoal Armani suit, delivering a speech that sounded crafted by a public relations firm. "Grace touched so many lives," he said, his voice carrying just the right tremor of emotion. Her dedication to her students, her love for her family, her brave battle with illness, these things defined her. I watched from the front pew as Margaret Chin, Dad's business partner, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. She'd been particularly attentive to Dad throughout the service, her hand finding his arm during the prayer, her presence constant at his side during the reception. It struck me as odd how comfortable she seemed in what should have been our family's space of grief. 3 days after the funeral, I discovered Dad had already begun what he called necessary arrangements. I found him in Mom's study with boxes and garbage bags, systematically erasing her presence from our home. Her beloved first editions were stacked carelessly on the floor. Her teaching awards had been swept into a box marked Donate. The sight of him dismantling her life so callously made bile rise in my throat. "What are you doing?" I demanded, grabbing a photo album from the trash pile. Dad barely looked up from shredding what appeared to be Mom's correspondence. "We need to move forward, Emma. Holding on to the past won't bring her back." His tone was matter of fact, as if he were discussing quarterly reports rather than his wife of 30 years. That evening, I remembered Mom's dying request about the blue folder. I waited until Dad left for what he called an urgent business dinner before searching her closet. Behind rows of shoes I found it, a faded blue folder stuffed with papers. My hands trembled as I opened it, but inside I found only old tax returns and insurance forms. Nothing that seemed worth her final desperate plea. Disappointed and confused, I almost missed the USB drive taped to the back cover. I pocketed the drive and returned home to examine it privately. The files were encrypted, requiring a password I didn't have. As I sat staring at the login screen, my phone rang. Helen Morrison, Mom's best friend since college, was calling from a number I didn't recognize. "Emma, I need to see you," she said without preamble. "Not at your apartment. Somewhere public. It's about your mother." We met at a busy coffee shop downtown where Helen looked nothing like the confident woman I'd known all my life. She kept glancing at the door, her hands wrapped around her cup as if seeking warmth. "I'm leaving town," she said quietly. "Maybe I'm paranoid, but after what happened to Grace, I don't feel safe." When I pressed for details, she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Your mother called me 2 weeks before she died. She was terrified, Emma. She said she discovered something about your father, something that explained her illness. She was gathering evidence, working with someone to expose him. Then suddenly she was in the hospital, and now she's gone." Helen slid a business card across the table. "This was the private investigator she hired. Maybe he can tell you more." "I'm sorry, but I can't be involved anymore." Before I could ask more questions, Helen was gone, leaving me with more questions than answers and a business card for a PI named Thomas Mitchell. When I called the number, it had been disconnected. I tried searching online but found only a brief news item about a Thomas Mitchell who died in a hit-and-run accident 2 days after Mom's death. The coincidences were piling up too high to ignore. Meanwhile, Dad's transformation continued at breakneck speed. Mom's home office became his gym. Her garden, which she'd tended for decades, was paved over for additional parking. But the most shocking change came exactly 3 months after the funeral when he called a family meeting. Michael, my younger brother, arrived from Boston looking uncomfortable. Dad stood before us like a CEO addressing shareholders. "I wanted you both to hear this from me," he began, his arm around Margaret's waist. "Margaret and I are getting married. We've found comfort in each other during this difficult time." The massive diamond on her finger caught the light as she smiled sympathetically at our stunned faces. 3 months. My mother had been dead for 3 months, and he was already replacing her. Michael found his voice first. "Dad, don't you think this is a bit sudden?" Dad's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Your mother would want me to be happy. She'd understand that life goes on." Margaret touched his arm gently, playing the role of the supportive partner to perfection. "We're not trying to replace Grace," she said in her softly accented voice. "We just want to build something new together." After they left, Michael and I sat in stunned silence. "Did you know they were together?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "But Emma, grief makes people do unexpected things. Maybe Dad just can't handle being alone." I wanted to shake him, to make him see what seemed so obvious to me. This wasn't grief. This was calculation. That night, I broke into Dad's home office using Mom's birthday as the code for his lock. His desk contained the usual business documents, but in a locked drawer I found something that made my blood run cold. Receipts for jewelry, dated 6 months before Mom's death. Restaurant bills for 2 from when Mom was supposedly in treatment. Hotel charges from weekend business trips. My father hadn't just moved on quickly from Mom's death. He'd been planning his new life while she was still alive. Armed with growing suspicions, I began investigating Linda, the private nurse who'd vanished immediately after Mom's funeral. Her LinkedIn profile had been deleted, but cached pages revealed a troubling history. She'd lost her nursing license in California 5 years ago for gross negligence resulting in patient harm. Yet somehow, she'd been caring for my mother with Dad's full knowledge and approval. Through careful research, I tracked down her last known address in Queens. The building manager remembered her clearly. Paid 6 months' rent in cash up front, he recalled. Never caused trouble, but had some interesting visitors. Well-dressed man in expensive suits came by regular-like. Drove a silver Mercedes. Dad drove a silver Mercedes. The manager also mentioned Linda left suddenly, abandoning most of her belongings. Only took 1 suitcase. Left everything else like she was running from something. My banking connections helped me trace financial records that painted a damning picture. Dad had been paying Linda $20,000 monthly, far more than any legitimate nursing salary. The payments started 6 months before Mom's illness and stopped the day after her death. Even more disturbing, I found similar payments to a Dr. Stephen Morrison, the physician who'd been treating Mom's mysterious condition. I visited my pharmacist friend, Jennifer, with a list of medications Mom had been taking. Her face went pale as she reviewed them. Emma, some of these drugs should never be combined. Amiodarone with verapamil? Digoxin at these doses? This protocol could cause severe cardiac symptoms, even heart failure in a healthy person. She hesitated before adding, if I didn't know better, I'd say someone was deliberately trying to poison your mother. The pieces were falling into place, but I needed more evidence. I finally tracked down Helen at her sister's house in Connecticut. She was packing to leave for Europe, convinced she was being watched. Over tea in her sister's kitchen, she revealed what Mom had discovered. Grace found out about the affair first, Helen explained, pulling out a folder of photographs. She hired that private investigator to follow Richard. These pictures showed everything. The photographs were devastating. Dad and Margaret at Mom's favorite restaurant while Mom was supposedly getting treatment. The 2 of them entering hotels during his business trips. Most damning was a photo of them looking at engagement rings dated 2 months before Mom's death. They hadn't just been having an affair. They'd been planning a future together while Mom was still alive. But that wasn't the worst part, Helen continued, her voice trembling. Grace discovered Richard had been stealing from her inheritance. Her father left her nearly $10 million in trust. Richard had power of attorney and had been transferring funds to offshore accounts. When Grace confronted him, that's when she suddenly got sick. Helen showed me copies of bank statements Mom had hidden with her. The theft was systematic and massive. Over 3 years, Dad had drained nearly $7 million from Mom's accounts, forging her signature on transfers and investment authorizations. He'd used the money to fund real estate investments with Margaret, building their empire on Mom's inheritance while slowly poisoning her. The private investigator's notes, which Helen had saved, detailed Dad's activities with chilling precision. Meetings with divorce lawyers that he never followed through on. Research into undetectable poisons. Contact with doctors who'd lost their licenses. Purchase of life insurance policies totaling $8 million. My father hadn't just killed my mother. He'd turned her murder into a business venture. I needed to find Dr. Morrison, the physician who'd been treating Mom. His practice had closed shortly after her death, but I tracked him to a small clinic in Newark. When I mentioned my mother's name, his face went ashen. "I can't talk to you," he said, trying to close his office door. I wedged my foot in the doorway. "She's dead because of you. The least you can do is tell me the truth." After a long moment, he let me in. His hands shook as he poured himself whiskey from a desk drawer. "Your father had information about my gambling debts," he admitted. "He offered to pay them if I helped with your mother's treatment. I thought he just wanted to control her care, maybe keep her sedated. I didn't realize until too late what he was really doing." Morrison explained how Dad had dictated Mom's treatment protocol, insisting on specific medications that Morrison knew were dangerous in combination. When I tried to refuse, he reminded me that I'd already falsified her records. I was trapped. The doses he demanded, they were killing her slowly, making it look like natural organ failure. I'm not proud of what I did, but I was desperate. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Mom's hairdresser called me, saying she'd found something Mom had left in her salon. It was a safety deposit box key with my name on it. Inside the box, I found the mother lode, Mom's video testimony recorded 2 weeks before her death, documenting everything she'd discovered. Financial records showing the full extent of Dad's theft. Medical research about drug interactions that could mimic her symptoms. And most importantly, a written confession from Linda admitting Dad had paid her to ensure Mom received specific medications. Mom looked directly into the camera in her final message to me. "Emma, if you're watching this, it means he succeeded. I know I don't have much time left. The medications are destroying my body, and I can't prove what's happening fast enough to save myself. But I won't let him get away with this. Use this evidence. Stop him before he hurts anyone else. And know that I love you more than words can say." With Mom's evidence in hand, I dove deeper into the technical aspects of her murder. The blue folder I'd originally found contained more than tax documents. Hidden between pages were printouts of Dad's research history, which Mom had somehow accessed. He'd searched for undetectable poisons, medication interactions causing heart failure, and most chillingly, how long does cremation destroy toxicology evidence? These searches dated back 18 months before Mom got sick. I consulted with a toxicologist who reviewed Mom's medical records and the medication protocol. "This is professionally orchestrated murder," he said bluntly. The drug combinations would create symptoms mimicking various conditions like chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and eventually heart failure. Brilliant in its cruelty, because the victim suffers slowly while appearing to have a natural illness. The security footage from the hospital proved Dad's final betrayal. I convinced a sympathetic security guard to let me review the Christmas Eve tapes. The footage showed Dad's Mercedes in the hospital garage at 6:45 p.m., contradicting his claims about traffic. He sat in his car for 20 minutes, on his phone, then drove away without entering the building. He'd been right there, choosing to let Mom die alone while he established his alibi. Further investigation revealed Dad and Margaret's relationship went back years. Former employees at Dad's firm shared stories about their close working relationship and late nights at the office. One secretary recalled finding them in a compromising position 5 years ago but was paid generously to sign an NDA and leave the company. The affair had been an open secret among those who worked closely with them. Financial forensics exposed the true scope of Dad's crimes. Beyond stealing Mom's inheritance, he'd taken out multiple insurance policies on her life over the past 3 years, structured to avoid detection. The total payout would exceed $12 million. He'd also convinced Mom to sign documents giving him sole ownership of properties she'd inherited, claiming it was for tax purposes. Margaret's name appeared on several of these transactions as a silent partner. I discovered Dad's first wife, Catherine, had died under suspicious circumstances 30 years ago. She'd been wealthy, coming from old Boston money, and had died in a boating accident just 2 years after their wedding. Dad inherited everything. The police reports showed inconsistencies in his story, but the case was closed when a witness mysteriously recanted their statement. That witness, I learned, had received a substantial payment from Dad's company shortly after. Mom's video testimony revealed she'd discovered this pattern. "I found documents in his safe about Catherine," she said on the recording. "The similarities are terrifying. She was isolated from family, had a nurse who controlled her medications, and died when Richard needed money for a business venture. I think my husband is a serial killer who marries for money." The medical evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Morrison, racked with guilt, had kept copies of everything. Dad's specific instructions on dosages, timing, and combinations designed to create maximum suffering while appearing medically justified. The vitamin B12 injection Dad gave Mom on Christmas Eve was actually a massive dose of digitalis, enough to cause fatal arrhythmias in her already weakened heart. Linda had documented everything in a journal, possibly as insurance. Her notes detailed Dad's instructions: increase the verapamil when she seems stronger. Add the supplement powder to all drinks. Ensure she takes the special vitamins before any family visits. Each entry was dated and included Dad's payments. She'd been creating evidence to protect herself, knowing she was participating in murder. The engagement ring Dad gave Margaret was purchased with Mom's money 6 months before her death. The receipt showed he'd had it engraved with "To New Beginnings" and their initials. Wedding venue contracts were signed while Mom was in the hospital. They'd planned their entire life together while orchestrating her death. The callousness was breathtaking. I found evidence of Dad's surveillance on our family. He'd installed tracking apps on Mom's phone and hidden cameras in the house to monitor her interactions with visitors. He knew about the private investigator from the beginning and had been playing a careful game, adjusting his plan to stay ahead of Mom's discoveries. The car accident that killed the PI was no coincidence. Brake fluid evidence suggested tampering. Dr. Morrison revealed the final piece of the medical puzzle. The Christmas Eve injection was meant to be the finale. He knew the hospital would be short-staffed, that serious deterioration might not be caught in time. He counted on chaos and holidays to mask his murder. "Your mother was supposed to die before midnight, making it a Christmas tragedy that no one would question too closely." Mom had known she was dying and used her remaining time to build a case against her killer. She'd mailed copies of evidence to multiple locations, including her lawyer in California who'd been instructed to wait 6 months before contacting me. She'd hidden money in accounts Dad didn't know about, ensuring I'd have resources to fight him. Even facing death, she'd been thinking ahead, planning for justice from beyond the grave. The scope of Dad's betrayal was complete. He hadn't just murdered my mother, he'd tortured her with a slow death while stealing her fortune and planning his new life. He'd watched her suffer, comforted her through pain he was causing, and held her hand while poisoning her. The man I'd called father was a monster wearing an expensive suit and a caring smile. When I confronted Dad with the evidence I'd gathered, his transformation was instantaneous. The loving father mask slipped, replaced by cold calculation. We were in his study, the same room where I'd first found Mom's bracelet. "Emma," he said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone I'd never heard before, "you're clearly not handling your grief well. These wild accusations, this paranoid behavior, it's concerning." He moved to his desk, pulling out a folder with my name on it. "I've been documenting your erratic behavior since the funeral. The break-ins to my office, harassment of my medical colleagues, these delusions about murder conspiracies. I've consulted with Dr. Patricia Hendricks, a prominent psychiatrist who specializes in grief-induced psychosis. She agrees you need immediate intervention." The gaslighting was masterful. Every piece of evidence I'd collected was reframed as a symptom of mental illness. The financial documents were misunderstandings of complex transactions. The medical evidence was misinterpretation by someone without medical training. Mom's video testimony was the confused ramblings of a dying woman on heavy medications. He'd prepared for this moment, anticipating my investigation. "I'm going to help you, sweetheart," he continued, his voice dripping with false concern. "There's an excellent facility in Connecticut where you can get the treatment you need. It's already arranged. You'll thank me when you're thinking clearly again." The threat was clear. Submit to being labeled mentally ill or face involuntary commitment. He'd found a way to silence me using the system meant to protect people. I fled his house and immediately called Michael, desperate for support from my brother. His response shattered my remaining faith in family. "Dad called me last week," he admitted. "He showed me your behavior, Emma. Breaking into offices, stalking his colleagues, making wild accusations. He's worried about you, and honestly, so am I. Maybe some time away would help you process Mom's death properly." The betrayal cut deep. "He's buying you," I accused. "What did he promise? The company? Money?" Michael's silence confirmed my suspicions. Finally, he spoke. "He's making me CEO of the New York branch. But that's not why I think you need help. You sound paranoid, Em. Mom died of natural causes. The doctors confirmed it. This conspiracy theory is destroying you. Even Aunt Ruth, Mom's own sister, had been turned against me. When I tried to show her Mom's video testimony, she refused to watch. Your father has been nothing but generous to our family," she said coldly. "He paid for my son's college, helped with my mortgage when I was struggling. And now you want to destroy him with these horrible lies? Grace would be ashamed of you." I later learned Dad had been strategically placing family members in his debt for years, creating a network of financial dependence that ensured loyalty. Every scholarship, every loan, every generous gift had been an investment in future silence. He'd bought my family's complicity long before he needed it, understanding that gratitude and greed would outweigh blood ties when necessary. My isolation escalated quickly. Jake, my boyfriend of 3 years, ended our relationship via text. "Your father offered me a position in the London office," he admitted when I demanded an explanation. "It's an incredible opportunity. But he made it clear I had to choose between the job and you. I'm sorry, Emma, but I can't throw away my career for your vendetta against him." Former colleagues began avoiding me after Dad made strategic phone calls. My boss called me in for a meeting, expressing concerns about my mental state. "Richard explained about your breakdown," she said sympathetically. "We think it's best if you take an extended leave of absence. Focus on your health." When I protested, she showed me emails I'd allegedly sent filled with disturbing content I'd never written. Dad had hacked my accounts, creating evidence of instability. My apartment was broken into while I was at work. The police were sympathetic but unhelpful. "No sign of forced entry," the detective noted. "Are you sure you didn't misplace these items?" Everything related to Mom's murder was gone, but valuable electronics were untouched. The message was clear. Dad could reach me anywhere, anytime. The security cameras in my building had mysteriously malfunctioned during the break-in. Bank accounts began freezing without explanation. Credit cards were suddenly declined. When I called to investigate, I learned Dad had filed papers claiming I was mentally incompetent and he needed to protect family assets from my destructive behavior. As Mom's executor, he had legal standing I couldn't easily challenge. My financial resources evaporated overnight, leaving me unable to hire lawyers or continue investigating. The threatening calls started subtly. Heavy breathing, hang-ups, untraceable numbers. Then came explicit warnings. "Stop digging or join your mother. Accidents happen every day. We know where you jog every morning." The police treated them as pranks, especially after Dad informed them about my mental health crisis and tendency toward attention-seeking behavior. When I tried to reach out to journalists, I discovered Dad had preemptively discredited me. A reporter friend admitted, "Your father sent us a whole package about your history of mental health issues, documentation of your harassment campaign against him. My editor won't touch this story. You're seen as an unreliable source with an axe to grind." "I'm sorry, Emma." The private investigator I hired lasted exactly 1 week before calling to terminate our arrangement. "Your father's lawyers contacted me," he explained. "They made it clear that helping you would result in lawsuits I can't afford. Plus, someone slashed my tires and left a note about minding my own business. I have a family to think about. Find someone else." Friends distanced themselves as rumors spread about my breakdown and dangerous obsessions. Social media posts I hadn't made appeared on my accounts, featuring conspiracy theories and threats against my father. By the time I regained control and deleted them, screenshots had been sent to everyone I knew. My reputation crumbled as Dad's narrative of a grief-stricken daughter's descent into madness took hold. Margaret played her role perfectly, the concerned stepmother-to-be worried about her future stepdaughter's mental health. She gave interviews to society pages about supporting Richard through this difficult time with Emma and hoping she gets the help she needs. The performance was flawless, painting them as victims of my instability rather than murderers covering their tracks. The restraining order was the final blow. Dad filed it claiming I'd threatened him and Margaret, stalked their homes, and endangered their safety. The judge, reviewing the mountain of fabricated evidence, granted it immediately. I was legally barred from coming within 500 feet of my father, effectively preventing me from gathering more evidence or confronting him publicly. The systematic destruction of evidence began with surgical precision. Every lead I'd followed was being erased, every witness silenced or eliminated. Helen Morrison died in a car accident on Route 95, her vehicle mysteriously veering off the road into a tree at high speed. The police report noted no skid marks, suggesting she never hit the brakes. Her sister called me sobbing, she was so careful after Grace died. This wasn't an accident. Dr. Morrison's clinic burned down 3 days after our meeting. The fire marshal ruled it arson, but no suspects were identified. Morrison himself disappeared completely. His apartment was empty, his phone disconnected, his medical license suspended for unprofessional conduct. Whether he'd fled or met a worse fate, I couldn't determine. The last text I received from him said simply, "I'm sorry. I can't help anymore." Linda's body was discovered in a motel room in Atlantic City. The official cause of death was an overdose of the same medications she'd been giving my mother. The scene was staged to look like suicide, complete with a rambling note about guilt and regret. But the handwriting didn't match samples I'd seen in her journal. Someone had silenced the one witness who could directly implicate my father in murder. Hospital records regarding Mom's treatment began changing. When I requested copies through a lawyer friend, critical pages were missing. Medication logs from December had been corrupted in a system update. Security footage from Christmas Eve was accidentally deleted during server maintenance. Every piece of evidence I'd viewed was systematically vanishing from official records. The safety deposit box where Mom had left her video testimony was emptied by someone claiming to be me. Despite bank protocols requiring identification and signatures, someone had accessed it using forged documents. The bank manager was apologetic but insisted their cameras had malfunctioned that day. The USB drive with Mom's final message was gone forever. My father's reach extended further than I'd imagined. The toxicologist who'd reviewed Mom's case suddenly retracted his analysis, claiming he'd misunderstood the medical data. When pressed, he admitted receiving threats against his daughter. "I have to think of my family," he said before cutting off all contact. One by one, every expert who'd supported my findings reversed their positions or disappeared entirely. Financial records I'd accumulated vanished from my cloud storage. Despite two-factor authentication, someone had accessed my accounts and deleted everything. Local copies on my laptop were destroyed when it was stolen from my locked car. The thief ignored my wallet and jewelry, taking only the computer containing evidence. Even backup drives hidden in my apartment disappeared during another break-in the police deemed unverifiable. Margaret announced her pregnancy at a charity gala, beaming as she cradled her still flat stomach. The timing was perfect for their narrative. The grieving widower finding new life and hope with his pregnant fiancé. Society pages gushed over their beautiful love story born from tragedy. No one mentioned that she'd been Dad's mistress while Mom was dying. I tried one last desperate attempt to warn Margaret about her eventual fate. I approached her at a public restaurant, staying outside the restraining order's boundaries. "You're next," I called out as security moved toward me. "Check his first wife. You're following the same pattern." Margaret's perfectly composed face showed a flicker of something, fear maybe, before Dad whispered in her ear and she smiled again. My warnings fell on deaf ears. Margaret had signed a prenuptial agreement that Dad's lawyers had crafted. If she died within 10 years of marriage, everything would go to him. She'd essentially signed her own death warrant, but love or greed blinded her to the danger. I wondered if she knew about the life insurance policies he'd already purchased in her name. The police finally took notice when I filed my 15th complaint, but not in the way I'd hoped. A detective visited to inform me that I was under investigation for harassment and stalking. "Your father has documented over 50 incidents of unwanted contact," he explained. "If this continues, you'll face criminal charges." The justice system had been weaponized against me. Mom's lawyer in California was killed in a home invasion before the 6-month waiting period ended. The evidence Mom had sent him was stolen, along with some valuables to make it look like a robbery. The killer was never caught. Every safeguard Mom had put in place was being systematically destroyed by someone who knew exactly where to look. Friends who'd initially supported me began experiencing their own troubles. Jennifer, the pharmacist who'd analyzed Mom's medications, had her license suspended after anonymous complaints about prescription irregularities. My former roommate's car was vandalized with a message, "Stop helping her." The intimidation worked. My support system crumbled as people chose self-preservation over truth. Diane, Dad's former secretary who'd been my last ally, sent me a final email. They offered me money to disappear or threats if I stayed. "I'm choosing to disappear. I've left something for you at the place we first met. Be careful, Emma. Your father has killed before and he'll kill again. Don't become another victim." When I went to retrieve whatever she'd left, I found only a newspaper clipping about Catherine's death 30 years ago. The final blow came when authorities raided my apartment with a warrant. They found planted evidence, threatening letters to my father I hadn't written, weapons I didn't own, and psychiatric medications prescribed to me by doctors I'd never seen. The frame job was thorough and professional. I was arrested for criminal harassment and making terrorist threats. My court-appointed attorney, the only lawyer I could afford, urged me to take a plea deal. "They have overwhelming evidence," she explained. "Take the deal, mandatory psychiatric treatment and probation. Otherwise, you're looking at serious jail time." I realized this had been Dad's endgame all along. Not just to silence me, but to completely discredit any future attempts to expose him. My salvation came from an unexpected source. While preparing for trial, my attorney received an anonymous package containing Diane's real final gift, decades of evidence she'd compiled about my father's crimes. As his secretary for 20 years, she'd witnessed more than he'd ever suspected. Her documentation was meticulous, professional, and devastating. The files revealed Dad's patterns stretched back further than even Mom had discovered. Catherine wasn't his first victim but his third. Before her, there had been Marie, a college girlfriend who'd inherited a fortune and died in a skiing accident. Before Marie, Jennifer, a high school sweetheart whose wealthy parents died in a house fire shortly before she herself drowned. Each death had funded Dad's rise from middle-class nobody to financial titan. Diane had saved emails, recorded conversations, and documented meetings that painted a clear picture of a serial killer who used marriage and business partnerships as weapons. She'd watched him operate for 2 decades, keeping evidence as insurance while struggling with her conscience. Mom's murder had finally pushed her to act, though fear kept her from coming forward directly. Among the evidence was a recording from Dad's office the day Mom died. He and Margaret discussed the timing of the final injection, calculating how long it would take Mom to die after the digitalis dose. "The beautiful thing," Dad's voice said clearly, "is that everyone expects Christmas Eve deaths to be tragic but natural. Stress, emotion, weakened hearts, it's perfect cover." Margaret laughed, adding, "Just like you planned with Catherine and that July 4th boating accident." The files included Margaret's own history, revealing she wasn't an innocent victim but an active participant who'd helped orchestrate previous deaths. She'd been involved in the accident that killed Dad's business partner 5 years ago, inheriting his shares in their company. Together, they were a killing team that used corporate mergers and marriages as hunting grounds. Diane had discovered their next targets, Margaret's elderly parents, who owned significant real estate in Shanghai. The plan was already in motion, with Margaret convincing them to visit for an extended stay after the baby was born. Documents showed Dad researching elderly accidents in the home and inheritance law in China. They were expanding internationally. Most shocking was evidence that Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the psychiatrist Dad had used to gaslight me, was his next wife target. Recently widowed and worth millions, she'd been marked for seduction and elimination. Dad had already begun the courtship, sending flowers and offering comfort for her loss while planning her eventual murder. The cycle would continue endlessly unless stopped. Working with my attorney, we brought this evidence to the state attorney general's office, bypassing local authorities Dad had influenced. The state took over the investigation, bringing in forensic accountants, cold case detectives, and federal resources. What they uncovered shocked even hardened investigators. Dad's victim count exceeded a dozen, with murders spanning 3 states over 35 years. The investigation revealed a network of corrupted professionals Dad had cultivated, doctors who'd lost licenses, nurses with gambling debts, lawyers with dark secrets. He'd built an infrastructure for murder, paying generously for services and silence. Some participants, like Dr. Morrison and Linda, were eliminated after use. Others remained in his pocket, ready for the next killing. Margaret cracked first when presented with evidence of Dad's plan to eventually eliminate her. Investigators showed her the insurance policies, the prenuptial terms that favored him if she died, and most damning, his research into pregnancy-related deaths. The baby she carried was just another prop in his performance. She'd been marked for death from the beginning. Her confession was comprehensive. She detailed every murder, every plan, every method they'd refined over years of killing. She revealed offshore accounts holding millions stolen from victims, properties purchased with blood money, and a trophy collection Dad maintained of jewelry from dead wives. Mom's medical bracelet was part of this collection, kept in a hidden safe with items from every woman he'd killed. The arrests happened at Dad and Margaret's wedding reception. Federal agents surrounded the country club as the couple cut their wedding cake. Dad maintained his composure even as handcuffs clicked around his wrists, telling guests this was a misunderstanding that his lawyers would resolve. But Margaret's testimony, combined with Diane's evidence and forensic accounting, built an unbreakable case. During interrogation, Dad finally dropped his mask entirely. "They were investments," he said coldly about his victims. "I gave them love, attention, everything they wanted. Their deaths were simply collecting on what I'd invested. It's business, nothing personal." His confession, given with the same calm he used for quarterly reports, chilled even veteran detectives. The trial became national news. Families of victims I'd never known existed came forward, sharing stories of loved ones who died mysteriously after befriending my father. The true scope of his crimes emerged: 15 confirmed murders, possibly more. He'd turned killing into a business model, calculating profit margins on human lives. Mom's video testimony, recovered from a backup Diane had made, became key evidence. Watching my mother calmly document her own murder, knowing she was dying but determined to see justice done, broke the courtroom's composure. Even the judge wiped away tears as Mom said, "I forgive Richard because hate would poison my last days." But forgiveness doesn't mean escape from consequences. He must be stopped. Dad received multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. Margaret, in exchange for her cooperation, received 25 to life. The other members of his network faced various charges, from murder to conspiracy to fraud. The financial crimes alone would have imprisoned them for decades. The murders ensured they'd never walk free again. During victim impact statements, I stood before the man who'd raised me and saw him clearly for the first time. Not my father, but a predator who'd worn the mask of a loving parent. "You killed my mother," I said steadily, "but you didn't break her. Her love, her courage, and her determination for justice defeated you. She won, Dad. Even in death, she won." The aftermath of Dad's conviction brought a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring back my mother or undo the trauma of discovering my father was a monster. The media attention was overwhelming, with reporters camping outside my apartment and true crime podcasts dissecting every detail of our family tragedy. I found myself living in a nightmare that was also somehow entertainment for millions. Michael struggled the most with accepting the truth. He defended Dad so fiercely that admitting his error meant confronting his own moral failures. "I chose money over my own sister," he said during one of our therapy sessions. "I let him convince me you were crazy because it was easier than believing our father was a killer." Our relationship slowly rebuilt on a foundation of shared grief and his genuine remorse. The state seized all of Dad's assets as proceeds of crime. Millions stolen from victims were returned to their families where possible. Mom's inheritance, what remained of it, was restored to her estate. I established the Grace Foundation with these funds, supporting families affected by domestic violence and those fighting to expose crimes within their own families. Mom would have wanted her money to help others find justice. I returned to therapy with a trauma specialist who helped me process the layers of betrayal and grief. "You've experienced a profound identity disruption," she explained. "The foundation of your childhood, your understanding of family, has been shattered. Healing means rebuilding your sense of self separate from your father's crimes." It was slow work, untangling which memories were real and which were performances. 6 months after the trial, I received a call from Margaret in prison. Against my therapist's advice, I agreed to meet her. She looked diminished in her orange jumpsuit, her pregnancy showing. "I need you to know about Grace's last message," she said quietly. "Richard made me go to the hospital that night, after he gave her the injection. I was supposed to confirm she was dying. But Grace was awake. She grabbed my hand and said, 'Tell Emma I'm at peace. Tell her the truth always surfaces.' Margaret's baby was born in prison and placed with her parents. The child would grow up knowing both parents were killers, another innocent victim of Dad's evil. I struggled with whether to maintain any connection, finally deciding to write letters the child could read when older, explaining their grandmother Grace had been a wonderful person who loved completely despite knowing how her story would end. I changed careers, leaving finance to become a victim advocate. My experience navigating Dad's gaslighting and the system's initial failures gave me unique insights into how predators operate within families. I specialized in cases where the perpetrator held power and respectability, using my story to help others recognize signs I'd missed. Every person I helped find justice felt like honoring Mom's memory. The first Christmas Eve after Dad's conviction, I visited Mom's grave with fresh poinsettias, her favorite holiday flower. I told her about the trial, the convictions, the foundation in her name. "You did it, Mom," I whispered to her headstone. "You saved me and so many others. Your courage in those final weeks changed everything." The cemetery was peaceful, snow falling softly, so different from that horrible night in the hospital. Survivors of Dad's other victims reached out, forming an unexpected support network. We met monthly, sharing stories and healing together. Catherine's sister told me how she'd always suspected Dad but could never prove anything. Marie's best friend had kept journals documenting her fears before her death. These women had carried suspicions for decades, finally vindicated but forever marked by loss. I learned through this network that Dad continued trying to manipulate from prison. He wrote letters proclaiming his innocence, claiming Margaret had masterminded everything. He gave interviews painting himself as a victim of ambitious women who'd used him. Even facing life in prison, he couldn't stop performing, couldn't admit the truth. I stopped reading anything about him, focusing instead on healing. One surprising positive emerged from the tragedy: connections with family I'd never known. Mom's cousins reached out, sharing stories about her childhood, her dreams before she met Dad. I learned she'd wanted to be a writer, had published poetry in college journals. They gave me a box of her early writings, windows into who she was before Dad's shadow fell over her life. Reading her words helped me understand her strength. Dating felt impossible initially. Trust, once shattered so fundamentally, was difficult to rebuild. When I finally met someone, a fellow advocate named James, I was honest about my past from the beginning. My father is a serial killer serving life in prison, I said on our third date. Instead of running, he listened, understanding that transparency was the only foundation I could build on. Slowly, carefully, I learned to trust again. The foundation grew beyond my expectations. We funded legal services for families challenging powerful abusers, supported research into coercive control, and created safe houses for those escaping dangerous situations. Every success story, every family saved, felt like Mom reaching through time to help others. Her death had meaning because we made it mean something. 5 years later, I stood before Congress testifying about the need for better protections for victims of family violence. I told Mom's story, how the system had failed her, how Dad had weaponized respectability and wealth. Predators don't always look like monsters, I concluded. Sometimes they wear expensive suits and give to charity. We must listen to victims, especially when the accused seems too respectable to be guilty. The legislation passed, creating new protocols for investigating deaths within families and protecting those who report suspected crimes. It was called Grace's Law, ensuring that future victims would have the protections my mother lacked. Watching the president sign it into law, I felt Mom's presence, her belief that truth and justice would prevail even when the path seemed impossible. Today, I continue the work, knowing that each day brings new challenges and small victories. The trauma never fully disappears, but it transforms from a weight into a tool for helping others. When I speak at conferences or support groups, I see Mom's influence in the hope that sparks in desperate eyes. Her story, our story, saves lives. Every Christmas Eve, I light a candle for all the women Dad silenced, including my mother. I remember her not as a victim but as a warrior who fought with the only weapons she had: truth, courage, and love. She died alone in that hospital room, but her legacy lives on in every person who finds strength in her story, every family saved because she refused to let evil win. My name is Emma, I'm 33 now, and I'm my mother's daughter. That means more than sharing her eyes or her laugh. It means carrying her courage forward, speaking truth to power, and believing that love ultimately conquers even the darkest evil. Mom died without seeing justice, but she lives on in every life touched by her sacrifice. Some things, I've learned, are stronger than death. If you've stayed with me through this difficult journey, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever noticed red flags in relationships that others dismissed? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, because your insight might save someone else. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of survival and justice. Share this video with anyone who needs to know they're not alone in facing family darkness. Thank you for listening, for believing, and for helping ensure that victims like my mother are never forgotten. Until next time, remember, the truth always finds its way to the light, no matter how deep the darkness tries to bury it.